Welcome to today's special bonus episode of Women in America, where we're joined by House Democratic Whip Katherine Clark, who is the highest ranking woman in House Democratic leadership, to talk about the fight for women's rights in a moment of just total political chaos. So with an administration that is openly hostile towards reproductive freedom and a Republican-controlled Congress, what are Democrats doing behind the scenes to protect women's rights? How is Congress pushing back against policies that harm women? We want to ask Whip Clark all of these questions. Whip Clark also shares why she spoke about her own miscarriage on the House floor and how people can pressure lawmakers to act. So if you care about the future of women's rights, this is a conversation that you don't want to miss. Let's jump into it. Welcome to our podcast. How are you?
I'm well, Eve. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is honestly the honor and pleasure is all ours. So really thankful for your time. I know we don't have much of it, so I'm gonna jump right in. Does that sound
All
good?
right, let's do it.
Okay, so Whip Clark, you represent the Massachusetts 5th District. You are a lawyer by trade. You have been in state politics since 2008, I believe, and you have been the minority whip since 2023. You are currently the highest ranking woman in the Democratic House leadership and only the second woman to ever serve as the House Democratic whip after Nancy Pelosi. Is this all correct?
That is all correct.
Can you give our listeners a little bit of a crash course around what your role is as minority house whip? Like, what does that mean? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Eve, for having me on. I am really so pleased to be here with you and your listeners, and we are wishing Party all the best on her leave. But let's just start with the fact that as honored as I am to be the highest ranking woman in Congress, second woman to only hold this position, just how pathetic that is overall. And just we have so much more work to do to make sure that women in this country are represented. But I am very honored to have this position. It is one that members of Congress, the Democratic caucus, elect me to, which so it's sort of like student government elections on hyperdrive. And what it means is that I am responsible for looking at the legislation that the majority, the GOP, are bringing our way and working across our caucus. So whether that's with Blue Dogs, the Progressive Caucus, to make sure that we are there rowing together and standing in solidarity to block really bad things that they're doing.
Mhm.
And, it is not always possible, but the message we send not only to the public, but to the Senate about that strength and staying together is really important. So a lot of my job is counting votes, but it's also knowing how to move members of Congress and which issues to pick to really make a stand on is the really fascinating part of my job. And what I love the most is figuring out what are the different pressures on members. They come from districts that can look so different from mine. And what is it that they need, and how can we put this, part of the strength of the Democratic caucus in the House is that we are so diverse in every way. And how can we make sure that we are doing work that everyone in our caucus can speak to?
Mhm. I love that you started out by acknowledging that it's pathetic that it's only the second time a woman has
I
served in
don't,
this role. As proud as
yeah,
we are, and I'm sure you are to be able to claim that, the reality is that it's 2025 and that is kind of psychotic.
it is. It truly is.
But
It
thank
truly
you
is.
for being the second. Thank you anyway. Um,
And how I ended up highest ranking woman, again, very honored. I take that responsibility like
yes,
very seriously.
yes.
But I am the Democratic whip, the minority whip. There should
Mhm.
be lots of people
There should
in the vice presidency, the presidency,
be.
Senate leadership that should be over me.
We will get there, but we have a lot of work to do,
We
right?
will. We will.
So, I want to kind of address the elephant in the room with a question that I think a lot of our listeners are thinking about before we get into our accounts raison d'etre around reproductive health. So
Yeah.
I want to address the chaotic time that we're living through right now, and having this conversation with you in this moment in this week is incredible to me, and I think incredible for our listeners. So, in this moment of chaos where we're facing, a hostile administration, a lot of Americans and our listeners, we see it in our social media comments every day for the last 2 weeks, feel like Congress is letting the White House and Elon Musk run like roughshod over American policies, including those that directly impact women. And I would love to hear you tell people what lawmakers are doing to fight against this so that we can dispel this myth that Congress isn't doing enough.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
I'm
So
kicking us off with a hard question, but
no,
please, I
no,
would love to
it's
hear
the
it.
question. And,
Yes.
I always want to talk about reproductive rights. So we
Yeah.
will get to that. But this
Yes.
is really the question of the moment
Right.
and the question that we have to answer. And people need to hear from us about what is happening
Mhm.
because we have two things going on. We have this chaos. And, Steve Bannon called it a strategy of muzzle velocity. You just flood the zone with all sorts of executive orders. So let's just hit a pause button right there.
Mhm.
Executive orders. Why are they doing that? They have the majority in the House, in the Senate, and they have a president that will sign any bill that they come to. What they are doing is going around Congress. That's what they're doing because they know that in the House and the Senate, that majority is very slim. And so they are afraid of what we demonstrated in the minority in the House for the last 2 years, that we are going to be the ones who can block them. So
Mhm.
they've decided we'll just go around Congress. So then it gets very confusing at home. People are like, why aren't they doing more?
Mhm.
And so we have a clear strategy and plan of action.
Mhm.
First, we have to mobilize, and I can tell you that people are mobilizing. We have 3,000 calls to my office this week. We don't have 3,000 calls to my office on barely any weeks.
Mhm.
That is an amazing voice. But so the energy is out there. Then we have to use legislative tools that we have. And what we filed yesterday was a sort of blandly named Taxpayer Data Protection Act. What is going in is the heart of what Elon Musk and his teenage gang of hackers are up to in these really critical systems. And that brings us to how we link the mobilization with that. I understand that people are looking to Democrats and saying, we supported you. You are the voice of reason here. Do something, fight. But we have to remember that we cannot do anything on the legislative side unless we have three Republicans. That's all it takes. Three Republicans to join us.
Mhm.
So when we file this legislation, now we need people to mobilize and say to the Republicans, especially who are sitting in, Harris 1 districts, what are you doing? When
Mhm.
do you stand up to your oath of office to uphold the Constitution? So we do have to mobilize, but we also have to change that lens to find three people who will say, I don't think this is okay. This is unconstitutional, it's illegal, and it is destructive. And we need three. So we have to use that mobilization to find those three and keep the pressure on them. Because I can tell you from my conversations this week, they're feeling pretty good about life. They're like, we are sitting here quiet while Donald Trump does whatever he wants with Elon Musk. We have an unvetted, unelected, confirmed billionaire, the richest man in the world, reaching into our most, our highest security, most private information for Americans. And we're saying, you guys are okay with that? And they're like, and all the calls are going to your offices. This is working out great. I understand why people are calling our offices, but we have to change our strategy also and make sure that we are putting the pressure on them to do everything they can as well. It's not just us. We'll be there, and we are going to be there. But the next point in this, we got mobilization, legislation, and then we have litigation. And right now, our most effective way that we can fight back is to join as we have. We are working hand in glove with partners to bring the lawsuits we need to stop this, because they're not coming to Congress to say, here's our recommendations on closing USAID. They're just going in and doing it. They're coming for the Department of Education next. They're already at the Department of Labor. They want to end health care in this country for low and moderate income people. What does that mean when you take away Medicaid? It means that women will not be able to access healthcare and cancer screenings. It means that our nursing homes that are the #1 recipient of Medicaid will close. These are real impacts, and we have Elon Musk out there saying it's okay with him. This is some sort of sick game to him that has such an impact on people we care about. And we have had success on pushing back on him. And I want your listeners to understand this. When they came to us at the end of December, they said, we're going to shut down government unless you write us a check for our tax policies and raise the debt ceiling now so that we can go ahead and further rig our system against working people in this country. And we said, if you want to shut down the government to do that, be our guest. You shut it down, because we are not voting for that. And they backed off. Then they came up with the birthright EO, and already we have a national injunction on that, working with our partners again outside to say, no, you don't get to do that. We have a thing called the Constitution, and it's written down there very clearly. So you do not get to go around Congress, go around our Constitution. That's been shut down. And this week we have seen a flurry of action when they froze all the government funding, and we're looking at firefighters and police officers and community health centers and Head Start programs all just panicked over what they were going to do because they couldn't make payroll. And we all know that childcare providers are so well paid. They could take, if they don't have their paycheck, I'm sure it'll all go smoothly for them in reaching into their savings and paying for rent and what they need for their families. The richest man in the world saying, let's not pay our Head Start providers. But we got working again with partners. We stopped that from going into effect. And we also have done that with Treasury and getting them out of that payment system. We heard they were headed to Department of Labor. We have stopped them from going in there. So we will continue to use the courts as we come to our legislative process, where we are really going to be able to use our leverage, and they cannot go around us as they have been when it comes to setting the budget, their tax plan to take money from middle and low income families and give it to the billionaire class, and raising our debt ceiling, which is paying our bills. And those 3 points are where you are going to see Congress response in full strength, because they can't go around Congress for that. So I hope that helps explain and give some hope that there is plenty of fight going on here on every single level, and we are going to use our tools in every single way. But right now, the litigation is really where we have to focus, because they're not bringing the things that we can block and stand together against to Congress.
Mm-hmm. No, that's gives kind of a perfect, I think, image of what's going on. I think people just need to see behind the curtain a little bit. So I really appreciate your candid response to that. Two things I want to highlight from what you just said is one, part of the problem is that Congress doesn't really have control over these executive orders, and he's intentionally going around Congress because he knows that Democrats will block the crap out of whatever he's doing.
That's exactly right.
The second thing I want to highlight is a question I always ask our guests at the end, and you've already addressed it beautifully, is what can people do? And people hear all the time they need to call congressional members, but a lot of people lose faith that that works because all they hear is their one call going to voicemail, and they don't know how it's tracked on the back end. So hearing you highlight that 3,000 people are calling you, you're clocking all these calls, you are listening to them, they're not going into like a dead space, it's working. That is very encouraging to hear. Um,
Here's the thing though, Eve, that we got to focus on. We were looking back on clippings from 8 years ago
mhm,
when Republicans were coming after our health care, when
mhm,
they said, we are going to dismantle the ACA and take this away. We're going to go back to treating gender as a pre-existing condition. And they came up with 12 health plans that were just junk plans and said, this is our substitute.
mhm,
The American people held those members of Congress, those Republican members, accountable. And they pushed them to have town halls. If they wouldn't show up for town halls, they did empty chair town halls. They mobilized and put pressure on them that helped propel changing in the midterms in 2018 back to Democrats and gave us that foothold to fight Donald Trump because we controlled the House.
mhm.
We have to do the same thing.
Yeah.
The calls to my office are great, but we have to mobilize and put pressure on these Republicans who are sitting there letting this happen.
Mhm,
And it's not immediate, but it's how we win power back. It's how we return sanity and the rule of law and fundamental fairness and equality back to the people. It's how we protect our country and democracy. So the mobilization is absolutely, it gives me so much hope because it's the only way we do this, but we've got to aim it
mhm.
where we can make a change.
And I think that's a great reminder to folks who may not be civically engaged every day is that your voice as a Democrat or a progressive is almost more powerful if you're a blue dot in a red state, right? And so your
Yeah.
point that you need three Republicans to vote for a Democratic, legislation in order for it to pass, like people need to call, not just you. And so one of the resources that we'll provide in this episode is helping people figure out how they can call their legislators, particularly those who live in red states and are represented by Republicans who may not, represent our listeners' wishes, because we know that a lot of these Republican executive orders or legislation in general, such as the federal funding freeze, such as foreign aid freezes, they disproportionately impact women and low income people and people of color. And so, with our last few minutes, I want to get into the reproductive piece of things. I know that you've been a lifelong advocate of women's health, gender equality. Could you tell us what's going on behind the scenes right now with protective legislation, whether it's what's going on with the ERA that I believe will soon, find its way into the court systems or other legislation that's been introduced in the 119th Congress? And also, if you could just briefly mention, I know that you've talked about your own miscarriage on the House floor. Would love to know what the reaction was to that. And then I have one final question to close us out.
Yeah.
Oh, please.
Okay, well, let's just be very frank and honest here. The impact of the last few years since the Dobbs decision on women and women's health is absolutely devastating.
Mhm.
I don't know how else to put it. And with all this chaos, I think that I know I'm so grateful that this podcast is continuing to talk about these impacts, because part of this, fire hose of executive orders is to keep us off balance and to keep us chasing things, and losing track of the fact that right now, because of abortion bans in states, 1/3 of every county in this country does not have a OBGYN. So if you want to have a baby and get prenatal care and a safe delivery, you cannot get that anywhere near where you live. And this is a very real, highly correlated effect of abortion bans. In Georgia, it's over 50% of their counties have no obstetrician because they have such a severe and restrictive ban in place. We're seeing medical school applications drop, and people leaving obstetrics as a field that they practice in because it is so difficult. And the reason is it ties back into my story, which is just, having a miscarriage, going to a sonogram that I thought was a typical pregnancy. This was my, was anticipating having a second child, and there was no heartbeat in that sonogram. And yet I wasn't experiencing any other symptoms of miscarriage. And so they sent me home, and I just never miscarried. And my doctor said, this is too long. You have to come in and have abortion because you are at a high risk for infection if you let this continue. And I remember asking them right before we did the procedure to just check the heartbeat one more time, because it just felt like, really, there's no other symptoms here. But there wasn't a heartbeat, and I got the services and care that I needed without question. And it was covered by insurance, and it was the recommendation, and no state legislator or member of Congress or president of the United States came in and said, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that. And that is exactly what we're seeing around this country. We're seeing women denied abortion care, and women who are having a crisis or an emergency in their existing pregnancies are also being denied care. The Republicans just brought a bill up here that tried to criminalize doctors who perform abortion care in third trimester. And their whole narrative was that there are women out there who wake up and say, I'm pregnant in my last trimester, and this is, I'm going to give birth to a healthy baby, and then we are going to conspire with my doctor to kill that baby. This is what they're saying on the floor of the US House of Representatives. And so if we think that they are not going to continue this quest for a national abortion ban and all that flows from that, when we see this, sort of, it's all like an office of management, an OMB budget memo. What they really did was cut off funding to community health centers. And you know what that means? It means you don't get cancer screenings, you don't get mammograms, you don't have routine health care, never mind abortion care when you need it. And this is an all-out war they're waging on women and women's health. In the positive news, we have also just filed this week Protect Contraception Act, because we know that part of their push for a nationwide abortion ban is also not going to leave contraception alone. So we are making sure that we are filing the legislation that we need to protect that crucial piece of healthcare for women and families in this country.
It is so heartwarming to just continue to hear you say that people are fighting for us against this legislation, because they are going after abortion, they're going after gender, they're going after contraception, they're going after IVF. Like, literally,
Yes,
nothing that protects women is safe. Nothing about
that's
women
right.
is safe. You know this.
That's right.
Um,
As they are also, looking at all of these DEI, when you boil it down, they are saying women don't belong,
Mhm.
and especially women of color, but all women
Mhm.
don't belong. And if you are in a position of authority, if you have risen up in your job, if you're in a prestigious place, you got there through some other way than merit. And what a dangerous message
Mhm. Mhm.
to send to women and girls in this country.
But we have Democrats in Congress fighting against this every single day. And our
Yeah.
listeners know that because we've done some incredible collaborations with the Democratic Women's Caucus. We've done interviews with several congressional members. So it's great to hear that reiterated by someone high up in Democratic leadership in the House. So thank you for reminding us of that. As a final question and thought from you, to be frank, since the election, we have received countless emails, comments, DMs from our supporters telling us that, frankly, they really struggle with even getting out of bed in the morning. They are so dejected by Trump's win and now what's been going on. I would love to hear from you how you get out of bed every day and what keeps you fighting the fight, honestly.
Yeah, first of all, I have two very large dogs that jump on me every morning, and
You don't have a
so
choice.
they make sure that I am up. And
Okay.
frankly, they're very grounding. They bring their own chaos, but it's a sweet, fluffy chaos, and
Yeah.
not a rights taking, women breaking kind of chaos
The
that we are.
only good type of chaos there is.
That's right. But I think one of our new members, Janelle Bynum from Oregon, gave me a really good way to think about this. We are in a formation as women in this country, and we know what our mission is. We are going to win back our rights. We are going to take our rightful place at leadership tables across this country in politics, in business, in nonprofits, in education, in art and dance, and wherever there are people gathering and good work to be done, we're going to be there. But we are fighting a lot. So we're going to form a formation, and formations know where they're going. And sometimes people in formation have to rest or drop back, but the formation keeps going. And that's the strength of it. And that is what women in this country are doing, and we're going to continue to do. And we're going to mobilize and be loud, and we're going to give each other, when you can't get out of bed, just know the rest of us are going to have your back, and we're going to get up and fight for you until you're ready.
I love that. We will fight for you until you're ready. So join us when you're ready.
Join us when you can.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really insightful and frankly encouraging discussion, and I'm just really grateful for your time today. Thank you so
Thank
much, Whip
you so
Clark.
much. And we thank you for all the inspiration that you are giving your listeners and everyone that you reach out to. Women in this country so need that. And we're really grateful that you have this outlet for everyone.